I'm so curious as to what the princes and Kurapika are doing right now as we head over to them again next chapter. So yeah, in case you didn't know, it is confirmed that Kurapika is going to appear in chapter 400. Togashi actually spoiled this close to 5 months ago now by posting the final panel of chapter 400 on Twitter, and would you look at that, it's our favorite blonde mop head. And this feels like it's been a long time coming. Like, I expected this batch to pick up with the mafia stuff because that's where we left off, but man, have I been craving to head back up to tier 1 and catch up with the actual Succession War. It's easy to forget, but tensions are seriously boiling on tier 1 right now because we have the death game within a death game currently happening involving Silent Majority and the mystery of exactly who their ability belongs to. So it looks like we'll be getting one last troop focused chapter with chapter 400 because the text at the end of 399 says that next time the troop will pursue the Hailey. But then it also says that the princes are on the move. So I suspect we'll be cutting back to tier 1 for the next set of chapters. And I suppose that the upper and the lower stories are going to kind of play out in tandem, leapfrogging between the two. And maybe when both of them are at maximum chaos, they'll eventually collide. But for now, I'm just preparing myself to try and remember the names of all of the bodyguards and the maids and all of the other people that just haven't been relevant in my life for the last 3 years. All I know right now is that I'm pretty damn hyped to see Kurapika, and hey, if Hisoka did follow Henry's proposal and take a trip to tier 1, then we might even see him interacting in the next batch as well, which I think would start to make things feel more like classic Hunter x Hunter again. Nobunaga didn't seem fazed when he lost his blade. Maybe he could use his order as a sword. I mean, almost certainly. In fact, Gon did exactly that when he developed his scissors ability, transmuting his aura to take on the properties of a Nen blade. And my general rule is that if Gon can do it, then so can every other enhancer, because most of them are actually better than him. Other options are definitely available to create sharp objects though. I mean, when introducing the very concept of Nen, one of the first things Wing does is sharpen paper via enhancement to turn it into a blade. And even Ramot is a good example of this, using enhancement to turn his own feathers into blades. So blade-based weapons and techniques are very much Enhancement 101. However, my question would be whether or not Nobunaga would actually want to use his aura in that sort of way. Nobunaga's skill set is so closely tied to a physical blade, and in particular he practices Iaido, which is a martial art that focuses on quick drawing one's blade from the sheath. So I don't think that it would be anywhere near as simple to replicate this very specific tool that he requires for this. I'd love it if you could clarify how Nobunaga and Henry were evicted. I can absolutely do that because it is slightly confusing. Togashi used diagrams in the last chapter for a very good reason, but luckily Reddit denizen Uberfate was able to create a very simple and easy to understand diagram. Nobunaga and Henry were evicted because the Nen guards actually dragged them into what is labeled here as the Hailey living room. That doorway was rigged with one of Viconte's teleportation landmines, which plonked our duo back into room 3101. That room itself having another teleportation landmine at the doorway, which will transfer people to what is labeled here as the shower room. And you can see how the loop works from there. Very importantly, both doorway abilities only trigger when someone enters the room, not when they exit. So there's a bit of a confusing irony at play here, whereby to kick someone out, you actually need to bring them in. But also, we now know where 2 of the landmines are. And at most, there could be 3, which Nobunaga does speculate on at the end. He says there's probably a special jump point for members only. I also think we should clarify one thing about Henry. I've seen some discussions centered on the absence of his ever-reliable pigeons, and why he didn't just fly some into the room, but there's actually quite a few reasons why. The biggest of which being that if Henry did, the pigeons probably would have been teleported because they're living things. And as far as we know, only objects can pass through. So this ability is just a flat-out counter to Henry, who can only create living things. But also because Henry is, well, he's all tuckered out. After making an oyster, a cat, 2 snake guns, and a multitude of pigeons, he's running a little low on aura. So in the past 10 chapters, that means we've pretty much seen the full scope of what Henry is capable of quantity-wise, not creative-wise. That is unlimited, and I think he did a pretty good job, all things considering. I can't help but feel this chapter was super weird. It seemed like they basically knew the troop was coming, but only prepared to have them kicked out of there. I can't help but feel like they had ample opportunity to score juicy 20 levels. Juicy. So it's one thing to know that your enemy is coming, but it's completely another thing to actually be able to do something about it with that knowledge. And this is all likely to do with Morena. One of the family members, I think it was Souffle, flat out stated that they were ordered not to engage with Nobunaga and Henry, which I suspect came from Morena, who knew full well that a head-on fight would only result in a third of her family's heads decapitated on the floor. Because there's a lot of people in this room, so many people. But remember this, of the 4 Nen uses we saw, all of them were defensive. The guards, the damage transfer, the implied healing, and the block, none of those abilities were suited to take down Henry or Nobunaga. Furthermore, there's also 3 people in this room who don't actually have abilities yet because they're still too low level. Gelato, Chiffon, and Mont Blanc, if I'm identifying them correctly. But then going back to the teleportation diagram, there's no actual way for these 2 parties to actually engage. Nobunaga and Henry can't get into the room because they'll get zipped, and if the Hailey members exit the living room, then they can't retreat back into it, or else they'll be teleported. So thinking about this in terms of all sorts of positionings, it would be a massive disadvantage for any of them to leave the living room. And given that none of them are actually suited to punch fight anyway, in retrospect, conflict was just never an option. Right now, Morena is playing very defensively. All of her attacking pieces like Dogman seem to be elsewhere, slowly leveling up and becoming stronger, just patiently waiting until Morena knows that she has the power to actually take on Nen users of this sort of high level. Did the activation of ability Moist Attack imply that Morena was somewhere in the hideout? It doesn't just imply it actually flat out confirms it. Morena is here, not here. Morena is there. And so that creepy panel that we saw of her in chapter 398 wasn't just for fun atmosphere and aesthetic flair. She is very close and likely monitoring everything that just happened, probably from her very comfy looking gamer chair. Thinking about her role as the game master a bit more, she's likely going to be taking on a more stationary position, observing and facilitating the game as opposed to getting too involved herself, despite the fact that she technically is a player and does have her own levels. But she seems to have set up a pretty amazing defense. In fact, I would say she's actually currently harder to reach than like half the princes. How many minutes do I put for popcorn in the microwave? It depends. For example, if it's ready-made popcorn, then you'd put it in for 0 minutes. I think some are giving Hailey family too much credit. If we swapped Nobunaga for Franklin, they would have been wiped out. Their abilities are way too specific. So I touched on this in the chapter review, but even I didn't quite express just the massive scope of how true it is. The Hailey family got so damn lucky. Because as stated, if this was Franklin, he would have given them all just a merciless fingery death. But also Machi, Ilimi, Kalato, and even Benolanov would have been instant bloodbaths. The funny thing with Benolanov in particular is that he really could have taken his time to summon Jupiter, because Yokotani's guards would have needed him to commit a crime before being able to evict him. So again, the Hailey family got very complacent here, but lucky for them, they won this dice roll. And I suppose what this means is that everyone in this room is now much more experienced as a result. They survived this mistake and won't make it again. Do we know the deal with the 22 disciples' professions? Like, are those part of the death game? Or were they their jobs before they overthrew the previous family leadership? Just something I've been wondering. So these are very easy to overlook because Togashi has this tendency to just bombard us with information. But when the Hailey family members are each introduced, we get 3 pieces of information. 4 if you include the names. I'm not. 3 pieces. We get their player level, we get their Nen affinity if they have one yet, and we get their former profession. And this is relevant because the eventual Nen abilities often tie directly into that profession. The obvious example being Yokotani, who was a quote unscrupulous lawyer. And so he has an ability based on a very subjectively applied concept of law and order, featuring toy robots for reasons. A lot of the Hailey family have what I'm going to refer to as a bit of a dodgy profession, like being former mafia hitmen, transporters, disposal, etc. Like there's a lot of mafia roles. It's almost like playing Town of Salem. And that makes sense because these disciples are all implied to have been members of the Hailey family before Morena took over. These were the 22 chosen that slaughtered the rest of the family. Although with that said, some of them do have interesting professions, such as Gelato, who is a pro gamer, or my favorite member Dogman, who is a pro wrestler. Emission needs a nerf, but such a cool category that's unexplored. Yeah, so the last 10 chapters and Togashi's memo especially have now turned Emission into this new OP category. And I think it's about time because Emission in the series so far is criminally underexplored. I imagine a big part of that was because Leorio was the protagonist chosen to showcase Emission, which becomes very problematic when Togashi then chooses not to showcase Leorio. You've got Gon, Killer, and Kurapika who cover enhancement, transmutation, and conjuration. Ilimi, he deals with manipulation. And many major villains get to show off just how special specialization is. But then there's poor, neglected Emission sitting there in the corner. No protagonist to sing its praises, no antagonist to show its terrifying potential. Just a man obsessed with dodgeball carrying the entire category on his appropriately broad shoulders. So again, I think it's about time that Emission got some of the spotlight. My only question is, where is Leorio? Great question. Because funnily enough, in this batch of chapters, we are much physically closer to Leorio than we have been throughout the entire Succession War. Well, not the entire Succession War, since the Black Whale one departed. He's currently in the medical ward on Tier 3 with both Cheadle and Gel doing all sorts of I don't know, medicine stuff. So if Tier 3 is going to be the ground zero of all of the stuff happening, then I think there is a great chance of eventually seeing Leorio and the others having to deal with it as well. And thinking about Tier 3 makes Morena's plan that much more brilliant, because she's chosen the direct center of the ship. Starting a war here basically cuts the ship in half. Tiers 1 and 2 become completely separated from 4 and 5. Will the anime ever return? So I think it's finally time to start taking this question a little bit seriously. Because to be clear, for the anime to come back, I think the Succession War arc does need to end, or at least have an ending within some sort of very visible reach. Come here ending, come here. Which, if Togashi and his assistants do end up producing the mentioned 30 more chapters, I think is very possible. Because that would give us a total of almost 100 chapters of material to work with. Far more than you would need for your standard 24 episode anime season. And they would just call it Hunter x Hunter, the Succession Contest. Featuring Not Gone. It sounds like a dream, but just like with the manga, I think that a team will be locked and loaded as soon as it becomes viable. New Hunter x Hunter in any medium is basically an excuse for companies to print money. The only thing holding this empire back right now is Togashi's back, but we're definitely getting to the point where this could be a very real reality.